I really feel like this movement is quite complex to watch, and therefore if you do a unisono, or if you do a half unisono, or if you do a solo, or if you do a counterpoint, you see it in really different ways. And I think being a little bit thorough in the way you present it felt necessary, at least for me until now, as a way to give us some clarity to what I'm trying to do. The main question I'm asking myself in working in movement that way is how movement can give the feeling of movement. And it might sound weird to ask this question, but sometimes you see someone moving a lot, moving around like crazy, and you are watching him and you do not feel the movement. You do not feel the movement yourself. And sometimes you see someone doing small movements, but they are giving yourself the feeling of movement in a strong way. And I think the question of how to give the feeling of movement has been huge in other art forms, like painting, sculpture, and photography, and movies also. How do you shoot something in order to make the spectator kind of move through the sequence? And I think, in fact, when you think about dance, you might think that the question doesn't arise, but it does, because movement by itself doesn't give necessarily the feeling of movement. And to me, really researching practically on that has to do a lot. It has to do a lot with unfinished movements, or movements that are suggesting movements, other movements, or movements that are not fully completed. Because then you can kind of fill in with your own kinesthetic empathy in some way. So a lot of the movements are, in some way or another, in many different ways, in fact, incomplete. Or so that's why we work with goal-oriented movements, because when you have a clear goal, it's easier to know how you are not fulfilling that goal than if you do not have a goal somehow. I don't know, for me, like if you see in the history of painting, for example, there is this opposition sometimes between painters that will draw or they will paint every little detail. Like if you take Canaletto, for example, he will paint every shading, and you get this wonderful visual pleasure of seeing that. But it's a bit frozen. It's like it's frozen, a bit like Jan van Eyck, for example. Every thread or every part of the fabric will be painted, but it's completely static in some way. And then if you take someone like Guardi, for example, painting the same view of Venice as Canaletto, but with kind of big brush strokes, there's a lot of potential. There's a lot of things that are not defined. And then there's a lot of potential for light effects, for movement, for atmosphere, that are not possible when you paint every little pixel, if you want, or every little square of the canvas. I think with movements happens a little bit the same. If you define movement completely, for example, if you define it in a geometrical way and you define every angle, everything, then you get something that can be wonderfully beautiful, but that is pretty static, or it's completely defined, it's already defined. Whereas if you leave some part undefined, or if you leave some aspects of the movement open, then other things can arise. And that's what I'm interested in. And in fact, I think it has to do a little bit with illusion, it has to do a bit with fiction. And I think this has been less present, let's say, at least in dance for a quite long time, because it is associated, or maybe that's my understanding of or my interpretation of it, but I think that fiction is often associated in movement with ballet, where fiction is used in a to create an idealized body. So for example, in ballet, when you do a line with your arm, you're not just doing a segment, you're doing a line that starts from the center of the body, but that extends infinitely in space. And then the body becomes the center of all these lines that extend infinitely in space, which creates a very specific kind of body and very idealized body. Now we are also working with fictions, but they are not used to create an idealized body. They are more, for example, temporal fiction, where you go towards something, but you stop before the completion of your action. So it actually creates a very, I don't know, it's pretty violent. It has a certain violence. And I thought this ambiguity was quite nice, to have an ambiguity between collaboration and opposition. And because I find it's an ambiguity you have in fighting sports, which have this great sensual or even erotic dimension, and also in sexuality, which has this violence that is there somehow. So you have this ambiguity, or let's say this tension between these two poles, between carrying sensuality and kind of paying attention to what the other one is going through, and this violence, or this thing that you impose something onto the other one's body. In the Neuburg, you have the Ephesus Museum, where there is this wonderful frieze of Ephesus. And when you look, if you look at the poses of all the soldiers, it's a big fight. They have no body part that are still, or that are at full extension. The knees are half bent. You can see the muscle tone everywhere. There are torsions everywhere. It's always in between. They are in between. They are never at the completion of the movement. They are getting there all the time. And I think that is what creates this amazing dynamism in the composition and in the feeling that you get from it. And I was not thinking of that when I made the piece, but I think it's pretty much the same strategy. Like to stop when every joint is getting is not completely locked, or it's not at the end of its range of motion, and then you can somehow feel what will be the continuation of that movement. You can feel in, but it's a feeling in which is not a mental, like it's not that you see the beginning of the movement and you imagine, oh, I know he will do that afterwards. You do not have time to do that, but your kind of, I think in a way, your kinesthetic, or your I don't know, I don't want to say your body, because it's really your sensory motor system in some way is doing that for you. So you get a surprise. For example, you get a surprise if you see someone that runs like crazy because it feels like he wants to jump and he doesn't jump, then you get a certain surprise, but it's a physical surprise. It's not an intellectual surprise, if you want. And this physical surprise is, I find, really interesting to experience, what it does to your breathing, what it does to yourself, as like how it affects you, basically. Yeah. One of the big reasons why we didn't use music is that I found that the sequences of movements that were organized with this interruption or this thing created such a strong rhythm, or an interesting rhythm, really complex, very complex visual rhythm, and also sound rhythm, also because of the impact on the floor, that if we would try to put a music on it, it would cancel each other. It would either cancel the music or cancel the movement. I'm actually now looking at different kinds of music that are not measured, that have no steady beats. The oldest one I found are from Baroque music. For example, you have lutes, pieces where they are derived from, basically people would kind of tune the lute, and then they would make chords to hear how it sounds, and then this got developed into a non-measured preludium, where all the notes are written but the rhythm are not written. It's completely free. And I think what's interesting in that is, if you play it, then if a dancer is also there, you can react to that, but not in a stupid one-to-one way. You can react in so many ways. And I think that's the same kind of reaction that can happen between two dancers. So yeah, that's pretty much, that would be kind of a dream, to manage to create a relation between the music and the dance that is akin to the one that is between the different dancers on the stage. But I don't know, I'm working on that for the later projects. I haven't quite found the way yet.